Chosen one, the story begins in a quiet moment where exhaustion has finally settled into your bones after years of carrying battles that seem to demand more from you than they ever returned. The road behind you feels long marked by seasons of loss, confusion, and perseverance that tested both your strength and your faith. You remember how certain things slipped away while you were simply trying to survive. Relationships that once felt secure slowly fractured under pressure. Opportunities you believed would shape your future suddenly disappeared, and dreams that once burned brightly inside your heart seemed to drift further into the distance. Even the inner peace that once came naturally became harder to find as the struggle stretched across years of life. The chosen one may have wondered whether those losses were permanent or whether the battle had taken more from you than it would ever give back. Yet in the middle of that quiet reflection, heaven interrupts the silence with a powerful declaration. God reveals that the season of suffering has reached its limit and that a new chapter is about to begin. Scripture reminds us in Joel 2:25 that the Lord promises to restore the years that were consumed by loss. The chosen one now hears heaven's assurance that nothing taken during the battle escaped God's attention, and what once seemed permanently gone is now being prepared for restoration beyond what you expected. Chosen one, the season you walked through was one that few people could fully understand unless they had lived through something similar themselves. For a long time, it felt as though life was taking far more than it was giving in return. Each year seemed to carry its own challenge, and the pattern of loss gradually created the impression that stability was always just out of reach. The chosen one may remember standing in moments of quiet reflection, wondering why so many pieces of life were slipping away despite your effort to remain faithful and hopeful. Scripture reminds us in Psalm 34:19 that the righteous face many troubles, yet the Lord delivers them from them all, revealing that difficulty does not necessarily mean divine absence. Even though the struggle felt overwhelming at times, heaven never stopped observing the path you were walking. Every step forward during that season carried meaning that was not immediately visible to you. Loss appeared in many different forms during those years, and each type of loss left its own mark on your heart. Financial strain sometimes forced the chosen one to make difficult decisions that required patience and humility. Opportunities you believed would open the door to progress disappeared unexpectedly, leaving you questioning whether your efforts had meaning. Relationships that once seemed dependable slowly fractured under the pressure of life's challenges, and the emotional wounds created by broken trust often lingered longer than you expected. Scripture reminds us in Psalm 147:3 that God heals the brokenhearted and binds up their wounds, revealing that even the deepest emotional pain never escapes his attention. The chosen one may have felt alone while carrying those experiences, yet heaven was quietly witnessing each moment of disappointment and endurance. The losses were not random accidents, but part of a season that would eventually reveal a deeper purpose. There were also periods when progress itself seemed almost impossible to achieve. The chosen one may remember how certain goals appeared close to being realized, only to encounter obstacles that forced you to begin again. Each attempt to rebuild something meaningful sometimes felt as though it was followed by another setback waiting just around the corner. When this pattern repeats often enough, the human heart begins questioning whether progress will ever truly arrive. Scripture reminds us in Galatians 6:9 not to grow weary in doing good, because the harvest comes at the proper time for those who refuse to give up. The promise of that verse may have felt distant while you were standing in the middle of repeated setbacks. Yet the persistence you showed during those difficult moments became one of the most powerful demonstrations of your faith. During the darkest parts of that season, confusion often accompanied the pain you were carrying. The chosen one may have asked difficult questions during prayer, wondering why the path of faith seemed to include so many obstacles. It is natural for the heart to search for meaning when suffering stretches across years rather than moments. Scripture itself reflects this struggle through voices such as David, who wrote in Psalm 13 about wondering how long the season of trouble would continue. The presence of these questions does not weaken faith, but reveals the honesty of a heart still reaching toward God. Even when answers did not arrive immediately, you continued searching for the presence of God in quiet moments of prayer and reflection. That persistence became one of the most important signs that your faith remained alive despite the storm. Another difficulty within that season involved the emotional exhaustion created by carrying disappointment for so long. When losses accumulate without immediate restoration, the spirit can grow weary in ways that are difficult to explain. The chosen one may have experienced days when hope felt fragile, as though believing too strongly in a better future might lead to further disappointment. Yet Scripture reminds us in Isaiah 40:31 that those who wait upon the Lord will renew their strength and rise on wings like eagles. Waiting is rarely easy, especially when life appears to move forward for others while your own path feels delayed. Still, the endurance you practiced during those years became part of the preparation shaping your future. Despite the confusion and pain, something within the chosen one refused to abandon faith completely. You may have felt discouraged at times, yet you continued returning to prayer even when the words felt heavy. You continued seeking God's presence even when circumstances made it difficult to see how his plan was unfolding. Scripture reminds us in Hebrews 11:1 that faith is the assurance of things hoped for and the conviction of things not yet seen. The faith you carried during the season of loss often existed in that unseen space where trust continued without visible evidence. Heaven saw that quiet persistence and recognized the strength within it. Looking back now, the chosen one begins recognizing that the season of loss was not merely a period of hardship, but also a time of formation. The endurance you developed while navigating those challenges shaped your ability to remain steady under pressure. The patience you learned during delayed opportunities strengthened your understanding of divine timing. Even the emotional wounds you carried eventually opened the door for deeper compassion toward others who walk through similar struggles. Scripture reminds us in Romans 5:3-4 that suffering produces perseverance. Perseverance produces character, and character produces hope. Those words now describe the transformation that quietly took place during the years you spent walking through loss. Although that season often felt like a series of setbacks, it also became the place where your faith matured beyond what it once was. The chosen one discovered that trusting God during uncertainty builds a deeper relationship than trusting him only during comfort. Every moment you chose to continue seeking his presence became part of the foundation for the restoration that heaven is now preparing. The losses you experienced were painful, yet they did not have the authority to determine the final direction of your story. Instead, they became the testing ground where endurance, humility, and faith quietly grew stronger within your life. Chosen one during the long season of struggle, it often felt as though your pain existed in silence, as if the tears you shed and the prayers you whispered disappeared into empty space. There were moments when the battle seemed invisible to everyone around you, leaving you wondering whether anyone truly understood the weight you were carrying. Yet heaven now reveals a truth that was hidden during those exhausting years. You were never unseen. Every tear, every quiet prayer, and every step of perseverance was being witnessed by God Himself. Scripture reminds us in Psalm 56:8 that God keeps track of our sorrows and records every tear in His book, revealing that not a single moment of your suffering escaped His attention. The chosen one may have felt forgotten during certain nights of the journey, yet heaven remained fully aware of everything you endured. What appeared silent from your perspective was never ignored from God's. Throughout the struggle, heaven was observing more than just the difficulties surrounding your life. God was also watching the decisions you made while standing in the middle of those challenges. The chosen one continued praying even when answers felt distant, and you continued searching for God's presence, even when circumstances made faith difficult to maintain. These moments of perseverance carried greater significance than you may have realized at the time. Scripture reminds us in Hebrews 6:10 that God is not unjust and will not forget the work and love shown in His name. Every act of quiet faithfulness during the storm became part of a spiritual record that heaven was preserving. The world may not have noticed the strength required for those moments, yet God saw each decision you made to continue trusting Him rather than surrendering to despair. Heaven was not only witnessing your perseverance, but also carefully observing the sacrifices you made during that season. There were opportunities you walked away from because they did not align with your values. There were situations where you chose patience rather than revenge, humility rather than pride, and faith rather than bitterness. Each of those choices required strength that was not always visible to others. Scripture reminds us in 1 Samuel 16:7 that people often look at outward appearances, but God looks at the heart. The chosen one may have felt as though your efforts to remain faithful went unnoticed by those around you. Yet heaven was carefully recording each moment when you chose integrity over convenience. These decisions shaped the spiritual character that God was forming within your life. During the struggle, some of the losses you experienced felt confusing and painful because their purpose was not immediately clear. Certain relationships faded away unexpectedly, and individuals you once trusted disappeared from your life during moments when support seemed most necessary. Opportunities you believed were essential for your future sometimes collapsed without explanation. The chosen one may have questioned why these things were allowed to happen, wondering whether those losses were signs that something had gone wrong. Yet Scripture reminds us in Proverbs 3:5-6 to trust in the Lord with all our heart and not lean solely on our own understanding. God now reveals that many of those losses were not punishments, but protection. Some people were removed because their presence would have hindered the future He was preparing for you. Certain paths were closed because they would have led you away from your true calling. Heaven also allowed certain struggles to expose habits and patterns that quietly influenced your life. During seasons of comfort, it can be difficult to recognize behaviors that limit spiritual growth or emotional health. Yet pressure often reveals what remains hidden beneath the surface. The chosen one may have noticed how the battle forced you to confront areas of your life that required healing or transformation. Scripture reminds us in Psalm 139:23-24 to ask God to search our hearts and reveal anything that needs correction so that we may walk in the path of life. The trials you endured became opportunities for that deeper self-examination. What once seemed like unnecessary difficulty now reveals itself as part of the process through which God strengthened your character. As the struggle continued, the shaping of your heart became one of the most important outcomes of the entire season. The chosen one gradually developed a wisdom that could not have been learned through comfort alone. Patience formed as you waited for answers that did not arrive immediately. Compassion grew as you experienced pain that allowed you to understand the struggles of others more deeply. Discernment developed as you learned to recognize the difference between genuine support and harmful influence. Scripture reminds us in James 1:2-4 that trials test faith and produce perseverance, allowing believers to become mature and complete. The challenges you faced were shaping a heart capable of carrying greater responsibility in the future. Even when the struggle felt overwhelming, heaven never allowed it to exist without purpose. God was watching each moment carefully, ensuring that the trials did not exceed the boundaries He had established. Scripture reminds us in 1 Corinthians 10:13 that God will not allow temptation or testing beyond what we can bear and will provide a way through it. The chosen one may have felt close to the limits of your strength during certain moments, yet God remained aware of exactly how much you could endure. The suffering you experienced was never meaningless. It was part of a process that was refining your faith and strengthening your spirit. Now, as you look back on that difficult season, the perspective begins to change. What once appeared to be years of unanswered questions now reveals itself as a time when God was quietly shaping your heart. The perseverance you developed, the wisdom you gained, and the compassion that now guides your interactions with others all emerged from those challenging experiences. The chosen one discovers that heaven had been watching every step of the journey, ensuring that even the painful chapters would contribute to a stronger and wiser life. The struggle was never ignored, and it was never meaningless. Instead, it became the place where God prepared your heart for the restoration that is now beginning to unfold. Chosen one. When you look back on the season of loss, the first emotion that may rise in your heart is confusion. During the struggle, it often felt as though life was quietly taking away pieces of your world one by one. Relationships faded, opportunities vanished, and certain dreams seemed to dissolve before they ever had the chance to grow. In those moments, the losses felt personal, as though something valuable had been removed from your life without explanation. Yet heaven now begins revealing a truth that was hidden while the battle was unfolding. Many of the things that disappeared from your life were never meant to accompany you into the next chapter God was preparing. Scripture reminds us in Isaiah 55, 8 to 9, that God's thoughts and ways are higher than human understanding, showing that divine perspective often sees danger or limitation where human eyes see opportunity. The chosen one may have interpreted those losses as setbacks, yet heaven was quietly guiding your path away from influences that could not support the future ahead. One of the most painful forms of loss involved relationships that once felt deeply important. Some people entered your life during seasons when you needed companionship, encouragement, or understanding. At the time, those connections appeared strong and meaningful, and the chosen one may have believed they would remain part of your story for years to come. Yet as circumstances changed, those relationships sometimes began showing cracks that revealed hidden imbalances. Certain individuals expected loyalty while offering little in return. Others created environments where misunderstanding and control replaced genuine trust. Scripture reminds us in 1 Corinthians 15:33 that unhealthy influences can quietly corrupt even strong character. God saw the patterns that were forming within those relationships long before they became visible to you. The endings you experienced were not random accidents, but divine interventions that prevented deeper wounds from developing later. The chosen one may have mourned those separations, yet heaven understood that some connections could not travel with you into the future God had planned. Another category of loss involved opportunities that once seemed essential for your progress. The chosen one may remember working hard towards certain goals, believing that success in those areas would shape the direction of your life. Plans were made, hopes were built, and expectations grew as those opportunities appeared within reach. Yet sometimes the doors you were approaching suddenly closed without warning. When those moments occurred, it was natural to question whether the effort you invested had been wasted. Scripture reminds us in Proverbs 16:9 that people plan their course, but the Lord ultimately directs their steps. God understood that some of the paths you pursued would have led you away from the deeper purpose He placed inside your life. Opportunities that looked promising on the surface often carried consequences or distractions that could have delayed your calling. The closed doors you experienced were not signs of failure, but redirections that kept you aligned with your true destiny. Loss also appeared in the form of habits and environments that slowly faded from your life during the struggle. Certain routines that once seemed comfortable gradually became difficult to maintain as circumstances changed. The chosen one may have felt disoriented when familiar patterns disappeared, wondering why stability was suddenly harder to find. Yet Scripture reminds us in Romans 12:2 not to conform to patterns that shape the world, but to be transformed through the renewal of the mind. God sometimes allows environments to change so that unhealthy habits lose their influence over a person's life. The struggles you faced forced you to reevaluate the patterns surrounding your daily decisions. Situations that once appeared normal were revealed as distractions that could have limited your growth. Through those losses, God was clearing space for healthier rhythms to form. During the battle, these losses often felt like punishment because their purpose was not immediately visible. The chosen one may have questioned whether mistakes or failures caused those separations. When multiple losses occur close together, the human heart naturally searches for reasons that explain the pain. Yet heaven now reveals that many of those experiences were acts of protection rather than discipline. Scripture reminds us in Psalm 121 that the Lord watches over His people and preserves their path. God saw the dangers and limitations hidden within certain relationships, opportunities, and environments long before you recognized them. By allowing those things to fade from your life, He was protecting the future that still awaited you. The pain you felt during those moments did not mean you had been abandoned. Instead, it reflected the difficulty of releasing what once felt familiar. As this understanding grows clearer, the chosen one begins viewing the past with a different perspective. The losses that once appeared meaningless now reveal their hidden purpose. Each relationship that ended created space for healthier connections to appear later. Every opportunity that closed prevented you from investing energy in paths that would not have fulfilled your calling. The habits and environments that faded away removed obstacles that might have limited your growth. Scripture reminds us in Jeremiah 29:11 that God's plans are designed to give His people a hopeful future rather than harm. The events you once interpreted as setbacks were often the very tools God used to guide your life toward that future. Through this realization, the chosen one discovers that loss does not always signify defeat. Sometimes it represents divine protection, unfolding in ways that are difficult to understand at first. What heaven removes from a person's life often reveals as much love as what it provides. The painful endings you experienced were not signs that your story was falling apart. Instead, they were part of the careful preparation shaping the path ahead. God was clearing away influences that could not travel with you into the next chapter of your journey. The losses that once caused confusion now stand as evidence that heaven was guiding your life even when the direction seemed unclear. Chosen one, every long season of struggle eventually reaches a moment that heaven has been preparing from the very beginning. While you were walking through the years of loss and exhaustion, it often felt as though the battle had no visible ending. Each new challenge seemed to extend the season further, and the weight of repeated disappointments created the impression that suffering had become the permanent landscape of your life. Yet heaven reveals that no season of hardship continues forever without purpose or limit. Scripture reminds us in Lamentations 3:31 to 33 that the Lord does not cast off forever. And though He allows grief for a time, He also shows compassion according to the abundance of His mercy. The chosen one may not have known when that moment would arrive, yet God had already determined the precise point where the struggle would end. Even when the night seemed endless, heaven had already scheduled the morning. There comes a moment in every spiritual journey when God announces that the season of testing has completed its work. This moment does not always arrive with dramatic signs or sudden public recognition. Often it begins quietly, almost like a whisper, within the spiritual atmosphere surrounding your life. The chosen one may begin noticing subtle changes before anything outwardly dramatic occurs. The heaviness that once accompanied every decision starts to loosen its grip. The exhaustion that once defined your daily experience begins fading into something lighter and more hopeful. Scripture reminds us in Isaiah 43:19 that God declares when He is doing a new thing and invites His people to perceive it even as it begins to unfold. This quiet shift signals that heaven has spoken a new word over your circumstances. The battle that once dominated your life has reached the point where God says it has gone far enough. As this turning point arrives, the chosen one senses a change in the spiritual atmosphere that surrounds your life. Situations that once felt heavy begin losing their power to discourage you. The emotional burdens you carried for so long begin lifting from your spirit as though an invisible weight has been removed. Scripture reminds us in Matthew 11:28 to 29 that Christ invites those who are weary and burdened to come to Him so that they may find rest for their souls. That rest begins appearing now in ways that feel both gentle and powerful. The confusion that once surrounded your thoughts begins clearing, and the future that once looked uncertain begins showing glimpses of direction. The shift may begin internally before it becomes visible externally, yet the change is real and undeniable. The chosen one realizes that something within the unseen realm has already begun moving. During this moment, God speaks a declaration that reshapes the direction of your story. The years of constant loss, exhaustion, and uncertainty will not be allowed to define the future of the chosen one. What once appeared to be the dominant chapter of your life now becomes the preparation for a different season entirely. Scripture reminds us in Psalm 35 that weeping may endure for a night, but joy arrives with the morning. The night you endured was longer than you expected, yet it was never meant to last forever. God now declares that the season of struggle has completed the purpose for which it was allowed. The endurance you developed, the faith that survived the silence, and the wisdom gained through hardship have all reached their appointed maturity. Heaven now moves your story into the next chapter. The chosen one begins realizing that this declaration changes not only circumstances, but also the way you see your own life. During the years of struggle, it was easy to believe that suffering might always remain part of your identity. Repeated disappointments sometimes made it difficult to imagine a future free from constant pressure. Yet God now reveals that the past season does not have the authority to determine what comes next. Scripture reminds us in Isaiah 61:3 that God replaces ashes with beauty and transforms mourning into the oil of joy. The experiences you carried as wounds are now being reshaped into the foundation for restoration. What once seemed like permanent loss becomes the starting point for renewed hope. As this divine declaration unfolds, restoration begins moving from promise into reality. The chosen one may first notice small changes that signal the beginning of this new movement. Opportunities begin appearing where doors once remained closed. Relationships that carry genuine peace begin forming where isolation once dominated your life. Even your inner thoughts begin reflecting confidence rather than exhaustion. Scripture reminds us in Joel 2:25 that God promises to restore the years that were consumed by loss. The restoration unfolding now is not accidental or temporary. It is the direct result of heaven announcing that the season of suffering has reached its conclusion. This moment becomes the true turning point in the story of the chosen one. The long chapter of struggle is no longer the present reality, but the past that prepared you for what lies ahead. The burdens that once defined your days begin fading as clarity replaces confusion and hope replaces exhaustion. God has spoken the word that changes the direction of your life. The season of loss has completed its purpose, and the season of restoration has begun. Chosen one, when God begins the season of restoration, he does not immediately start with the outward circumstances that were lost during the battle. Heaven understands that the deepest damage created by long seasons of struggle is often not visible to others. The years of betrayal, rejection, and disappointment leave marks within the heart that cannot simply disappear when circumstances begin to improve. For this reason, God begins restoration by healing the inner life of the chosen one. Scripture reminds us in Psalm 147:3 that the Lord heals the brokenhearted and binds up their wounds, revealing that divine restoration often begins in the hidden places of the soul rather than in the visible parts of life. The wounds that formed during the battle are not ignored or dismissed by heaven. Instead, God moves gently into those places of pain, beginning the quiet work of restoring the strength of your spirit. During the long season of struggle, the chosen one carried emotional fatigue that slowly accumulated through repeated disappointments. Betrayal from people you trusted created wounds that made it difficult to believe in loyalty again. Rejection sometimes left you questioning your value or wondering whether your efforts truly mattered. Disappointments in opportunities or plans often produced the feeling that progress might never arrive. These experiences formed a heavy emotional burden that quietly followed you through each day. Yet God now begins lifting that burden in ways that transform the atmosphere of your heart. Scripture reminds us in Matthew 11:28 that Christ invites those who are weary and burdened to come to him so they may find rest for their souls. The rest that once seemed distant now begins appearing as God restores your inner peace. As this healing unfolds, the chosen one begins noticing that anxiety gradually loses its authority over your thoughts. Situations that once created tension no longer produce the same emotional reaction. The heart that once anticipated disappointment now begins rediscovering the possibility of hope. Scripture reminds us in Philippians 4:7 that the peace of God surpasses understanding and guards both the heart and mind. That peace begins replacing the anxious patterns that developed during the years of struggle. Instead of constantly preparing for another loss, the chosen one begins learning to rest in the confidence that God is guiding the future. The emotional fatigue that once defined your daily life slowly gives way to renewed strength and stability. Another part of this inner restoration involves the transformation of memories that once carried pain. During the battle, certain experiences may have remained vivid in your mind because of the hurt they created. Betrayals, misunderstandings, and failures sometimes replayed within your thoughts, making it difficult to move forward without remembering what was lost. Yet God now begins changing the way those memories affect your heart. Scripture reminds us in Colossians 3:13 to forgive one another just as the Lord forgave us. Forgiveness does not erase the past, but it removes the power those events once held over your emotions. The chosen one begins noticing that the memories that once caused deep pain gradually lose their ability to disturb your peace. Instead of feeling trapped by those experiences, you begin understanding them through the lens of growth and wisdom. Through this process, forgiveness and understanding begin growing within your heart. The chosen one may realize that some of the people who caused pain were acting from their own confusion, weakness, or insecurity. While their actions may have been harmful, God now helps you release the emotional weight connected to those experiences. Scripture reminds us in Ephesians 4:31 to 32 to put away bitterness and anger while choosing kindness and compassion. As forgiveness grows, the emotional space once filled with resentment becomes available for peace. The healing that God brings is not superficial comfort, but a deep transformation of how your heart carries the past. As the inner healing continues, God also begins rebuilding the confidence that the battle tried to erode. During seasons of loss, the chosen one may have started questioning your own ability to move forward successfully. Repeated disappointments sometimes create the impression that progress will always be followed by another setback. Yet heaven now restores your confidence by reminding you of your true identity. Scripture reminds us in Philippians 1:6 that the God who began a good work within you will continue that work until it is complete. The future of the chosen one was never dependent on the failures or betrayals experienced during the battle. God's purpose for your life remains intact, and the confidence he now restores is rooted in that truth. This restored confidence becomes essential for the next chapter of your journey. God understands that external restoration cannot fully develop if fear still dominates the heart. The chosen one must be able to walk into new opportunities without constantly expecting the past to repeat itself. For this reason, heaven rebuilds your sense of courage and faith before restoring the outward aspects of your life. Scripture reminds us in Isaiah 41:10 not to fear because God strengthens and upholds those who trust him. As that promise becomes real in your life, the fear created by previous losses begins fading away. Through this healing process, the chosen one begins realizing that the end of the battle was never only about recovering what was lost. It was also about restoring the strength and confidence needed to move forward with wisdom. God prepares your heart so that the blessings ahead can be received without the shadow of past wounds controlling your decisions. The peace that now fills your spirit becomes the foundation upon which the rest of restoration will unfold. The inner healing God provides allows the chosen one to step into the future, not with hesitation, but with renewed trust that the same God who healed your heart will guide the path ahead. Chosen one, as the healing of your heart continues unfolding, God begins restoring movement in the outward areas of your life that once seemed completely stalled. During the long season of struggle, it often felt as though progress had been paused indefinitely. Plans that once carried promise were interrupted doors that once appeared open, suddenly closed, and the direction you believed your life would follow became uncertain. The chosen one may remember standing in moments of quiet reflection, wondering whether the opportunities that disappeared would ever return in some form. Yet heaven now reveals that restoration does not simply return what was lost in the exact same form. Instead, God begins opening opportunities that align more clearly with the calling placed upon your life from the beginning. Scripture reminds us in Jeremiah 29:11 that God's plans are designed to give his people hope and a future rather than harm. The opportunities appearing now are not accidental replacements for what was lost. They represent the unfolding of the purpose God was shaping during the years of preparation. At first, these new opportunities may appear quietly, almost as though they are emerging from unexpected places. The chosen one may notice conversations leading to possibilities that were not part of your original plans. Connections with people who understand your vision begin forming in ways that feel natural rather than forced. Situations that once seemed unrelated to your future suddenly reveal new potential. Scripture reminds us in Revelation 3:8 that God can place an open door before someone that no one has the power to shut. When heaven begins restoring direction, those doors open not through frantic effort, but through divine alignment. The chosen one discovers that opportunities now appear with a sense of peace rather than pressure. Instead of struggling to force progress, you begin recognizing that God is guiding the path forward step by step. This process also reveals something profound about the doors that once closed during the earlier season of your life. At the time, those closed opportunities may have felt like painful disappointments that delayed your progress. The chosen one may have believed that certain paths were essential for reaching your goals. Yet as new doors open, you begin realizing that many of the earlier opportunities would have led you away from the deeper purpose God intended for your life. Scripture reminds us in Proverbs 16:9 that people plan their course, but the Lord directs their steps. What once looked like delay was often divine protection, guiding you away from paths that could not sustain your future. The closed doors you mourned were actually part of the careful directions shaping your journey. As these new doors open, the chosen one begins recognizing the presence of divine favor working quietly within your life. Opportunities appear at the right moment, often through connections that could not have been predicted. Conversations unfold naturally, and ideas that once seemed distant begin developing into practical possibilities. Scripture reminds us in Psalm 90:17 to ask God to establish the work of our hands, illustrating that true progress often comes through divine favor rather than human effort alone. The restoration unfolding now carries that sense of divine establishment. Instead of struggling to create momentum through constant effort, you begin witnessing how God places the right opportunities in your path at the appropriate time. Another aspect of this restoration involves the return of direction that once felt lost during the battle. When struggles last for long periods, the future can appear uncertain and difficult to imagine. The chosen one may have focused primarily on surviving each day rather than planning for long-term purpose. Yet as healing continues, your sense of calling begins returning with renewed clarity. Scripture reminds us in Psalm 37:23 that the steps of the righteous are ordered by the Lord. The direction now appearing in your life reflects the fulfillment of that promise. The gifts, passions, and insights developed during the years of struggle begin aligning with the opportunities emerging before you. What once felt like wandering now reveals itself as preparation for accurate positioning. The chosen one gradually realizes that God's restoration often arrives in forms greater than what was originally lost. The opportunities that appear now carry a deeper alignment with your purpose than the ones you once pursued. Instead of returning you to the exact circumstances you had before the battle, God provides paths that reflect the wisdom and maturity developed during those years. Scripture reminds us in Ephesians 3:20 that God is able to do exceedingly and abundantly beyond what we ask or imagine. The restoration unfolding now reflects that promise. What you once hoped for may have seemed significant at the time, yet the opportunities appearing in this new season reveal a greater vision than you originally expected. Through this unfolding process, the chosen one begins seeing the earlier delays from a completely different perspective. During the struggle, it was easy to interpret waiting as a sign that progress had been blocked or postponed indefinitely. Yet now the timing of events begins revealing a pattern that only God could have arranged. Opportunities appear precisely when your heart has been healed and your perspective has matured. Relationships form with people who understand your calling because they are entering your life at the correct moment. Scripture reminds us in Ecclesiastes 3 that every purpose under heaven has its appointed time. The delays you experienced were not wasted years, but preparation for the moment when divine timing would align every piece of the story. As direction and opportunity return to your life, the chosen one begins understanding that the battle was never meant to destroy your purpose. Instead, it created the conditions necessary for your calling to develop with greater strength and wisdom. The years of struggle prepared your heart to handle success with humility and discernment. The losses you experienced removed influences that could have distracted you from the path ahead. Now that restoration has begun, your journey moves forward with a clarity that was impossible during the earlier seasons. What once felt like delay now reveals itself as divine timing, guiding every step of your story. Chosen one, as the season of restoration continues unfolding, you begin to notice that God is not merely returning the things that were lost during the years of struggle. The work He is doing reaches far deeper than simple replacement. Heaven understands that the life you lived before the battle contained certain weaknesses and fragile foundations that could not support the future prepared for you. For this reason, restoration begins with rebuilding rather than simply restoring. Scripture reminds us in Psalm 127:1 that unless the Lord builds the house, those who labor do so in vain, revealing that true stability only exists when God Himself establishes the foundation. The chosen one now enters a process where every part of life is being rebuilt with greater wisdom and strength than before. What is emerging from the ruins of the old season is not a return to the past, but the construction of something stronger and more aligned with God's purpose. One of the first areas where this rebuilding becomes visible involves the relationships surrounding your life. During the previous season, some relationships were shaped by imbalance, misunderstanding, or quiet competition that slowly drained your strength. The chosen one may have once believed those connections were normal because they had been present for so long. Yet the struggles you endured revealed the difference between relationships that support growth and those that quietly weaken it. As restoration unfolds, God begins introducing new connections with people who carry encouragement, honesty, and genuine support. Scripture reminds us in Proverbs 27:17 that iron sharpens iron, illustrating how healthy relationships strengthen character and purpose. The people now entering your life recognize your calling and celebrate your progress rather than feeling threatened by it. These connections bring clarity rather than confusion and stability rather than emotional exhaustion. Alongside these new relationships, the chosen one also begins learning how to recognize healthy boundaries. During the earlier seasons of your life, you may have felt responsible for maintaining peace in situations that quietly damaged your well-being. It can be difficult to establish boundaries when the desire to help others or maintain harmony becomes stronger than the need to protect your own spiritual health. Yet the battle you endured revealed the cost of allowing unhealthy influences to remain too close for too long. Scripture reminds us in Proverbs 4:23 to guard the heart carefully because it influences the direction of life. Through the lessons learned during the struggle, God now teaches you how to protect the peace He has restored within your spirit. The chosen one becomes more attentive to the environments and conversations that surround your life, recognizing that healthy boundaries are not acts of rejection, but expressions of wisdom. As these boundaries develop, spiritual discernment also grows stronger within you. The experiences of the past, taught the chosen one how easily appearances can disguise deeper motives. Some people who once seemed trustworthy revealed intentions that were not aligned with your well being or purpose. These lessons, though painful at the time, became valuable preparation for the future now unfolding before you. Scripture reminds us in 1 John 4:1 to test the spirits rather than believing every influence that appears trustworthy. God now equips you with the ability to recognize the difference between genuine encouragement and subtle manipulation. This discernment allows you to choose relationships and opportunities that support your calling rather than distract from it. The wisdom gained through the battle becomes one of the most valuable gifts shaping your future. Another transformation appears in the way your life begins organizing itself around healthier priorities. During the years of struggle, it was often necessary for the chosen one to focus primarily on survival. Energy was spent navigating challenges rather than building long-term stability. Yet as restoration continues, your focus gradually shifts from survival toward purposeful growth. Scripture reminds us in Matthew 7:24 that the wise person builds their house upon the rock so that it remains steady when storms appear. God now helps you build your life on that kind of foundation. Decisions become guided by discernment rather than urgency, and relationships are chosen based on alignment with purpose rather than convenience. The stability forming in your life reflects the strength of the new foundation God is establishing. Through this rebuilding process, the chosen one also develops a deeper understanding of God's purpose for your journey. The experiences you endured during the battle revealed aspects of your character that might otherwise have remained hidden. You discovered resilience in moments when giving up would have been easier. You learned patience in seasons when waiting was unavoidable. You developed compassion for others who struggle because you personally understand the weight of hardship. Scripture reminds us in Romans 8:28 that God works all things together for good for those who love him and are called according to his purpose. The struggles you once questioned are now part of the wisdom guiding your future decisions. As the rebuilding continues, the life emerging around you becomes noticeably more stable than the one that existed before the struggle began. The chosen one may look back and realize that the earlier version of your life was supported by foundations that were not strong enough to withstand the pressures that eventually arrived. Certain relationships lacked honesty, certain environments encouraged distraction, and certain habits quietly weakened your focus. God allowed the battle to reveal those weaknesses so that the future could be built on something stronger. What he now constructs within your life carries greater stability because it rests on wisdom gained through experience. The restoration unfolding now therefore becomes something greater than simple recovery from loss. God is building a life for the chosen one that is more aligned with purpose, more protected by discernment, and more supported by healthy relationships. The new foundations forming beneath your future provide stability that did not exist before the storm. What once appeared as destruction now reveals itself as the clearing of ground where something stronger could be built. Through this rebuilding process, the chosen one discovers that God's restoration does not merely repair what was broken, but creates a life that stands stronger, wiser, and more aligned with divine purpose than the one that existed before the struggle began. Chosen one, as the season of restoration unfolds more fully, you begin to realize that the journey you walk through was never only about your own survival or personal healing. The path from loss to renewal has quietly shaped you into someone capable of guiding others who are still standing in the middle of their own storms. During the years of struggle, the pain often felt deeply personal, as though the battle existed only within the boundaries of your own life. Yet heaven now reveals that every step you endured has formed a testimony that reaches far beyond your individual story. Scripture reminds us in 2 Corinthians 1:4 that God comforts us in our troubles so that we may comfort others with the same comfort we have received from him. The experiences you once carried as wounds now become tools through which you can strengthen the faith of those who feel lost or discouraged. The chosen one begins to recognize that the journey itself has become part of the purpose God prepared for you. As people begin hearing your story, they notice that the scars you carry no longer represent defeat. Instead, those marks of the past become reminders of how God restores what once appeared permanently broken. During the darkest moments of the struggle, it often felt impossible to imagine a future where healing could truly exist. Certain losses seemed too deep to recover from, and the emotional wounds left by betrayal or disappointment sometimes felt permanent. Yet Scripture reminds us in Joel 2:25 that God promises to restore the years that were consumed by destruction. The restoration unfolding in your life now stands as visible evidence of that promise. When others see how your life has changed, they begin believing that restoration might also be possible in their own circumstances. The scars that once caused pain now become symbols of endurance and hope. Through this transformation, the chosen one gradually becomes known for qualities that were forged during the battle itself. Resilience appears in the way you face challenges without surrendering to despair. Faith becomes visible in the confidence with which you speak about God's guidance, even when the future remains uncertain. Compassion grows in your interactions with others because you understand the weight of struggles that are not easily explained. Scripture reminds us in Romans 5:3-4 that suffering produces perseverance. Perseverance produces character, and character produces hope. The character developed through your experiences becomes a powerful influence on the people who encounter your story. Instead of being defined by the suffering you endured, you become recognized for the strength and wisdom that emerged from those experiences. This transformation also changes the way you relate to people who are still walking through seasons of loss. The chosen one no longer offers encouragement based only on theory or distant optimism. Your words carry credibility because they come from lived experience. When someone describes the exhaustion of waiting for answers or the pain of watching opportunities disappear, you understand those feelings in a way that few others can. Scripture reminds us in Galatians 6:2 to carry one another's burdens and in doing so, fulfill the law of Christ. The empathy developed during your struggle allows you to stand beside others with genuine understanding. The testimony of your life becomes a light that guides people through the darkness they are currently facing. At the same time, the restored life you now experience becomes a living demonstration of God's faithfulness. People who observe your journey begin noticing how the years of loss did not erase the purpose placed within your life. Instead, those difficult seasons prepared you for a deeper understanding of God's power to heal and rebuild. Scripture reminds us in Psalm 42:3 that God lifts his people from the pit of despair, sets their feet upon a rock, and places a new song in their mouths so that many will see and trust in him. The new chapter of your life reflects that promise unfolding before the eyes of others. Your restoration becomes more than a personal victory. It becomes a testimony that encourages faith in those who witness it. The chosen one also begins recognizing that the purpose revealed through your journey extends into the future in ways you may not yet fully understand. The wisdom gained through the battle will influence decisions, relationships, and opportunities that continue unfolding in the years ahead. The resilience you developed becomes a foundation upon which new challenges can be faced with confidence rather than fear. Scripture reminds us in Revelation 12:11 that believers overcome by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of their testimony. The testimony now forming within your life carries power because it demonstrates that God remains faithful even when circumstances appear hopeless. As this realization grows stronger, the past begins to look different from the perspective of the present. The losses you once mourned now appear as chapters that shape the wisdom guiding your future. The disappointments that once caused confusion reveal themselves as moments where God redirected your path towards something greater. The chosen one sees that the darkest seasons did not destroy your life, but prepared it for a deeper purpose. What once seemed like the end of hope became the beginning of restoration. The restored life you now carry becomes a message visible without words. People see the peace that replaced anxiety, the strength that replaced exhaustion, and the faith that survived the storm. Scripture reminds us in Numbers 23:19 that God is not a man who lies or changes his mind, meaning his promises remain trustworthy even when fulfillment appears delayed. Your story becomes living evidence of that truth. The chosen one stands as a testimony that God's promises never fail, even after the longest and darkest seasons of struggle. Chosen one, as the story reaches its closing moment, you begin to look back over the long road behind you with a perspective that was impossible to see while you were still walking through it. The losses once felt final, as though the things that disappeared from your life had taken pieces of your future with them. During the darkest seasons, it seemed as if the story had been reduced to survival, with little assurance that restoration would ever come. Yet now the chosen one begins to recognize that those painful chapters were never meant to be the ending of your story. Instead, they were part of a larger process that quietly prepared your life for something deeper than you originally imagined. Scripture reminds us in Romans 8:28 that God works all things together for the good of those who love him and are called according to his purpose, revealing that even the most confusing seasons carry meaning within his design. God now proves his faithfulness in ways that once seemed impossible to predict. Peace returns to the places where anxiety once lived, and opportunities begin appearing where doors once remained closed. Relationships built on honesty and encouragement replace connections that once drained your spirit. Purpose rises again within your heart with greater clarity and strength than before. Scripture reminds us in Joel 2:25 that the Lord promises to restore the years that were consumed by loss, and the chosen one now begins witnessing that promise unfolding in real and visible ways. The suffering that once felt endless becomes a chapter that shaped the resilience and wisdom you now carry into the future. The story closes with the chosen one walking forward with renewed faith and quiet confidence, trusting that the same God who preserved you through the struggle will continue guiding every step of the restored life now unfolding ahead.